In the fall of 1972, the Soviet Union, as Russia and its puppet republics were called at the time, took on a team of Canadian NHL stars in an 8-game slugfest known as the Summit Series. The Canadian NHL stars, known as Team Canada, won the series 4 games to 3 with one tie. Team Canada trailed 2 games to 1 with one tie after the first 4 games in Canada, then lost the first game in the Soviet Union to go down 3 games to 1 with one tie. Team Canada would have to win the final 3 games in order to win the series, and they did so in memorable fashion in Game 8 after recovering from a 5-3 deficit after 2 periods of play. One of the instrumental players on Team Canada was Pete Mahovlich, who ended his NHL career as a 4-time Stanley Cup winner. On December 30, 2022, I talked briefly with Pete about the Summit Series.
Hello.
Hi, this is Mike Lee of Saturday Sportsline Memories. Is this Pete Mahovlich?
Yes, it is. How are you?
I'm doing well, Pete. Happy New Year to you and yours, a couple of days ahead of time. Do you have some time right now to talk about the Summit Series?
I do.
Okay, thank you very much. Very gracious for your time, and I certainly appreciate that. Pete, what was your assessment and your teammates and Harry Sinden's assessment of the Russian skills and talent before Game 1? I know there were a lot of prognosticators saying it was going to be a cakewalk for Canada, but among your teammates and yourself, how did you feel about the Russians?
Well, first of all, we didn't have any information that was useful to us, videos, things like that, uh, prior uh, prior scouting things, because they were not when this was put together. There was no games being played, and we we knew that they were better uh, than most amateur teams. That's for sure. Better than most junior A teams at the time. Probably comparable like to an American Hockey League team at the time. That was what we felt, and I think. I mean, I don't know what other people felt. All I know was we didn't have access to the type of um, coverage that they would have today uh, through video, through games being televised and things like that. But we certainly found out as we went along that you have to be. It's not just enough to have good players on a roster. You have to have good players that have been a team for a while, trust each other, that are willing to sacrifice things for each other.
The first 4 games were a real challenge in Canada. You fell behind 2 games to 1 with one tie. What was the mood among your coaches and your teammates after the fourth game, headed to, well, it wasn't to Russia, but actually to Sweden for some time off?
Well, we knew that obviously by that time we were certainly not going to win 8 games, and that was the problem. Everybody thought that this was going to be easy and a cakewalk, and some of the things that we now know uh, made things even more difficult for us. But what it did was it started to solidify us as a group of players when we went over to Sweden for 2 exhibition games. We started to become uh, almost like a little island of sorts, with everybody uh, hoping, probably hoping that we would end up losing the whole series, you know. But it was was one of those things that you have uh, happen to you once in a lifetime, and this series was a once in a lifetime venue. It was the very first time that the pros were going to play a number of games against the so-called amateurs. They were much more professional about things than we ever thought of being. They trained off ice. They trained as a group, uh, 11 months of the year, whether it was playing soccer or weightlifting or conditioning. They did things as a group where we were just a bunch of all stars from different teams, and consequently, it was much more difficult for us to achieve what we did.
Well, speaking of working almost year round, my only access to information about the series when I was 14 years old, living in rural Indiana, which was not a hockey hotbed, certainly. And we didn't get
No,
anything in the way of broadcasts or media coverage through the papers. But the one source of information I got was Mark Mulvoy's articles in Sports Illustrated. And I remember a
okay.
comment that Mulvoy wrote down from Harry Sinden, your head coach. He said after the series, after Game 8, he said, and I'm rephrasing it, not stating it exactly, but basically Sinden said, I think we may have to go back and revisit how we work doing hockey. Maybe we're going to have to start working year round. Maybe we're going to have to start doing some of the things the Russians do.
Well, if you take a look at the athlete today, that's exactly what has happened. They are they take probably I know this for a fact because I have a grandnephew playing for the Montreal Canadiens by the name of Josh Anderson, and I know his work ethic. He takes maybe 2 weeks when the season is finished to just sort of relax and start to heal up his body, and then he starts conditioning and working out, and uh, whether it's just his own body conditioning or skills or working on things that he looks at in video. Uh, they're at it all the time. We didn't do that. We were the season was finished and guys would go home and most of us at the time had other jobs. We because it wasn't enough to be just a hockey player to make a good living. You had to be doing other things in the off season to supplement your income.
When the series moved to Russia and all 4 games were played in Moscow, Game 5 went to the Russians, and so it was 3-1 Russia with one tie. And then, of course, Game 6 and Game 7 went to Team Canada, which set up Game 8. And there was a big controversy regarding the selection of referees for game number 8. What do you recall about that?
Well, see, we didn't know anything what was going on behind the scenes. There were things that happened back in 1972 that I just found out about over the last 6 months through different articles and different books that were written and different interviews that had taken place. I had no idea what was going on with what the Russians tried to accomplish behind the scenes, and the fact that we were able to overcome some of the things that had happened just tells you what it's like to be part of something at the start where everything is so negative, and then to end up on the positive side, winning that series, uh, becoming lifelong friends with players that you never would have talked to. Guys like Bobby Clark, guys like Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito, Paul Henderson. These were all players that you would never speak to at the time, and then you all of a sudden become lifelong friends.
And that's a really special thing. Game 8, as we just mentioned, there was the refereeing controversy, but obviously it got worked out because Game 8 was played. And at the end of 2 periods, Team Canada was down 5-3. And then Team Canada came out in the third period. Esposito scored a goal to bring Team Canada within one. Cournoyer got the tying goal. And of course, Paul Henderson, as we all know, well, at least people in Canada know, a lot of people in the States probably don't know it. Paul Henderson, of course, notched the game winner with 34 seconds to go. But after period two, Pete, I wonder, do you recall what Harry Sinden and John Ferguson, your assistant coach, told you folks in the locker room between periods 2 and 3?
Well, the funny thing about it was there wasn't much being said. We knew what had to happen, so on and so forth. And as the game wore on, we knew how difficult it was going to be because of the refereeing. That was the game where J.P. Parisi in the first period was ejected because of so many bad calls against us. And then the next thing you know, there was a line. Lines had to be changed a little bit, and that was the first time I got to play on a line on a regular basis. Here we are. We're used to the league and international play playing with 18 skaters and 2 goaltenders. Well, back then we were playing with 16 skaters and 2 goaltenders. So in other words, you had 3 lines, an extra forward, and 6 defensemen. That's how we ended up playing it. Well, when Parisi got thrown out, Phil Esposito and Cournoyer, he was playing with them. I was generally just used as a penalty killer throughout the series, played the left wing with them. So next thing you know, I got to play an awful lot over the last 2 periods of that series, and found myself in quite a situation throughout the last 2 periods.
There have been a lot of, especially in Canada, not so much here in the States, but a lot of documentaries, and I see a lot of YouTube videos, which I'm certain the source is Canada, because frankly, in the States, there wasn't a lot of interest.
A selling point on one of the books that I've read.
Yes, go ahead.
There's this new book out by John Bacon called The Greatest Comeback. And this is a book that I read initially, and where I got more information out of there that I didn't know about, and how things transpired and why, and how some of the players from the WHA were not allowed to play, and different little scenarios that took place that shouldn't have taken place. And the fact that, we call it Team Canada, it wasn't Team Canada. It was Team NHL, because there wasn't a player from the WHA at the time that was allowed to play with us.
And the biggest name, of course, was Bobby Hull.
Well, there was Bobby Hull, but at the time, there was also Dave Keon, who went on, Derek Sanderson, who went a different route. Then there was also Jerry Cheevers, the goaltender, also who I played with, who played with the Montreal Canadiens. Everybody doesn't remember this guy, but J.C. Tremblay was one of the best defensemen that the Montreal Canadiens had. He goes to Quebec. He's not allowed to play. So you take a look at 4 or 5 of these players that would have had an impact on the game. Definitely Bobby Hull would have had an impact on the game. He had an impact wherever he went.
And then, of course, we can't forget about the fact that Bobby Orr was with you, but was unable to play because he was injured.
He was no factor anyways, because he couldn't play. His knee was so bad.
Right.
But he was the best player of all time in my mind. From day one, he's still the best player that I've ever seen.
Let's go back to the last part of game number 8. As I mentioned, Paul Henderson got the winning goal with 34 seconds remaining in the game. And I've read some accounts, I don't know if it's from the Peanut Gallery or somebody who's really observant and knowledgeable about the game, but some people suggest that Tretiak clenched up, got tight. He played all of the games in goal for the Soviet Union, and the suggestion was that maybe he had just reached the end of his rope physically and perhaps mentally in Game 8. What do you think about that?
Well, let's look at some facts first of all. The fact was that we were never in shape like they were to start with. As the series rolled on, we had the ability to get a little bit better, and they were going to be as good as they were at the first game that they played. That was their best game. They were not used to playing an 8 game series like we were, or a 7 game series, because you'd go to the Olympic tournaments, you play against each team one time until the medal round. Then you'd play, maybe you would play one team 3 times at the most, but never on back nights. So all of a sudden, it becomes, it wears on you, and all of a sudden, sure, they're up 3 games to 1, then they lose, game 5, they win. Game 6, they lose. Game 7, they lose. Well, when we went to, when we had lost game 5, Harry had already made the decision that they were going to, no matter what happened and how it happened, game 6, 7, and 8, the goaltenders were going to be alternated. So Kenny played game 6, Tony played game 7, and then Kenny played game 8.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no, the one thing with the Russians, they never changed a thing. They kept playing the same way. And we made subtle changes to our lineup. We made subtle changes to how we played that affected the game as the game wore on.
Game 8 also had some drama involving you. The goal light.
Well,
Do you want to talk about? I'll let you talk about that. Go
well,
ahead.
first of all, I was just going to say, even in game 8, we scored a goal to make it 6-5. Do they pull the goaltender to try to tie it up? No. They never ever pulled their goaltender in either of the games that we were up in the last minute or whatever, in game 6, 7, or 8.
I did
They
not know
never
that.
pulled. Well, there's this is what I'm saying. These are the little things that the little caveats people don't realize, that they were structured a certain way. They went into the Olympics or the World Championships structured a certain way, and they never made changes. But they were certainly great teams because they played together a lot. They understood where players. They all understood how they were going to play, and they would all play the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Not us.
A little more
And then
flexibility, a
a
little
little
more
more
adept
flexibility.
to meet changing conditions.
Exactly.
So, going back to that incident with the malfunctioning, supposedly malfunctioning goal light, um,
Right.
you got a bit involved when Alan Eagleson was roughed up in the stands. Can you give your version of
Right.
that?
Well, here's I was on uh, I was on the ice for the fourth goal. I got an assist to make it 5-4, and then Cornwall, we were on the ice. Cornwall scores the goal, and we're celebrating, and we go back to center ice, and the next thing you know, the goal line had not gone on, but we all knew it was a goal. There was the referees knew it was a goal. There was no issue, and they were about ready to put the tie, make it 5-5, and there's a big ruckus on the opposite side of the benches, and somebody had yelled, "Well, they've got Alan Eagleson," and I'm thinking, "They got Alan Eagleson? Why?" So I look over, and sure enough, they're ready to drag Alan out of the. Well, he wasn't in the stands at the time, but he was. They were trying to drag him into a corridor and take him out of the rink, I guess. And I said, "Oh, geez!" So I jumped over the boards, and of course, the guards at the time, they were all carrying guns and machine guns and so on and so forth. I looked like I was going to swing my Sherwood hockey stick at these guys. They met Alan Globo, and Alan jumped over the boards and onto the ice. And so that wasn't a very smart move on my part, but I continued to make a lot of stupid moves through my life. And that one there was one that I'm very proud of what I did. I know that Alan has did things as we went on, as we all know, and lost a lot of credibility. But he certainly was the main reason that we were there. He was one of the premier guys to stand up for us all the way through. He was always uh, with us. Didn't matter what the score was, how many games we lost, so on and so forth. He was one of the architects of that team, and he was the architect of why Harry Sinnen and John Ferguson were there, and he was the architect why most of the players were there.
Well, anything else, Pete, that you want to add here to this interview?
Well, it just tells you how important it was to the game of hockey, how it changed the game of hockey, how we as Canadians thought we knew everything about the game, learned from what the Russians had to teach us at that time, and consequently, the Russians again learned from us. The Swedes learned from us. The Czechoslovakians. These are all teams now, and Finland, and all these teams have come together and been world champions, and have sent players to the National Hockey League. The National Hockey League in 1972 was primarily, um, if you take a look at it, they went from 16s in 1966-67 with 120 players. There was one American on in that league at the time. To 1972, there might have been about uh, 10 or 12 Americans playing, and that was it. Then you take a look at 95 and 2000, and all of a sudden you got 25 to 40% of non-Canadians playing, and probably it's even more so today. You've got more Americans playing. The game exploded. The game is in every corner of the United States right now. It's in Florida. It's in Arizona. It's in all the hot spots. And what's who's getting dressed? The there are Finns, there are Czechoslovakians, there are Russians, there are people from all places that play hockey that become part of the National Hockey League today, and it's just a great honor to have participated in that, to see the explosion of hockey that has taken place.
Well, Pete, it's been a great honor to talk to you as someone who was raised, as I say, in rural Indiana with a lot of basketball and very little hockey exposure. This was a fascinating story. I've been, following it off and on for a long, long time, and I finally wanted to, before the 50th anniversary expired here in 2022, talk to someone who was a very instrumental part of that. And for that, sir, I deeply appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. And for me, it's a great honor for a little kid to come out of a little town in northern Ontario called Timmins and Schumacher, Ontario, to be part of one of the great stories in sports of all time. And I appreciate the interview. Thank you so kindly.
Pete, God
And
bless.
Happy New Year.
Yep, Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.